Hello, I'm Troy Walsh. I'm a practice lead for Magenic Soft Vision in Minneapolis, and today I'll be talking about Selenium, the weird parts. So we're all familiar with Selenium. It's one of the most popular tools in browser automation, and the basics are pretty simple, right? You fire up a WebDriver, you navigate to a URL, you interact with a page, you click stuff, you read stuff, rinse and repeat until your test is done, then you close your driver. But that's only very superficially what Selenium can do. It gets more interesting and a lot weirder. Now I have to just say, IE is the worst. And anybody that's had to do browser-based automation knows IE is where you're going to get 90% of your issues from. First off, you can't run tests parallel locally. You don't get headless. They're a bunch of problems. Tests won't even start up if your protection modes aren't all enabled or all disabled across all zones. Which is kind of a pain, especially with corporate security. Sometimes that's just not a thing. And of course, over the years, there have been different like registry settings that you had to set in order for it to actually work. There's also issues with compatibility mode when you're automating against a web page that has compatibility mode set. Often there's a bug in IE that will push it back to a very old version. I believe IE 5. The problem with this is basically any of the good CSS selectors stop working. So you lose support for CSS 2 and 3. So you always have to fall back to XPath if you're dealing with IE in compatibility mode. Another big issue is if you have an application that's opening tabs, you have to make sure you close all those tabs before you shut down Selenium. Because what happens is the browser gets orphaned. And anybody that's done a lot of automation knows a couple orphaned browsers can really hurt your build servers. Right? You can bring down a machine in a pretty short time if you orphan enough browsers. That and not all the interactions work. Specifically, Click I've had big issues with where every other WebDriver is able to click a button, but not IE. So I'll have to often fall back to JavaScript clicks in order for IE to work for me. Now that I've gotten complaining about IE out of my system, let's move on to finds. So Selenium has a couple of different types of finds, and they work slightly differently depending upon the context in which they're used. So first part, there is find element and find elements. Find element only finds one element, so it will find the first of that type. The rub is, if an element is not found, it will throw an exception. But you can use find elements, and find elements will actually return a list of elements to you, and the size is 0. So find elements is really good for, let's say you're expecting an element not to exist, and you don't want to throw an exception. You don't want to do error handling, but they're actually quite similar. Another cool thing, so we all know that you can use a WebDriver to find element or find elements, but you can also use other web elements to find sub-elements. So you can search a web element as though that web element is the entire DOM. And this can be really useful when you're dealing with things like tables and that kind of structure. I also heavily use this in Appium when I'm doing automation with WinAppDriver. It limits the scope of what I'm looking for, really speeds up my automation. That being said, XPath actually gives you a kind of a magic trick here. So if you do a find element or find elements off of another element, you can actually go up the tree above the element that you're searching, because XPath lets you kind of go up the tree structure. So you can see that example there where we have XPath of ... that will actually explicitly go to the parent element. I strongly suggest not actually using this, but if you have to or really need to, it is an amazing feature to have. So part of using Selenium is waiting, right? We always find ourselves waiting for different elements to exist or to be in a specific state. So there are a couple of ways that you can deal with this. Well, the first and the bad way is you can just hard code sleeps. If you're doing this, you're a bad person and you should feel bad about yourself. That being said, total hypocrite. I know there are times that it's absolutely needed, but you really want to minimize them. So let's talk about the good waits. So there's implicit wait, and this is basically Selenium will wait up to a certain amount of time to find an element. So this is pretty rudimentary. Does this element exist? I will wait up to however many seconds or milliseconds or whatever you set it to. And that works pretty well for, I'd say, 75–80% of the use cases. But the more you use Selenium, the more you get into the explicit and fluent waits. Explicit and fluent waits are very similar. I believe the key difference is one throws an exception and one doesn't. That they're so similar that I basically consider them the same thing. So what explicit waits do is they actually wait for an element to meet, and you can actually have that element meet a certain condition. So for instance, enabled, right? I want to wait for this element to be enabled. The explicit wait will actually check for that element to exist, and then also check that it's in the state that you want it. So really powerful. It also has a polling mechanism. So it's basically how often do I recheck? So this way you're not constantly rechecking the DOM and slowing down your processes. There is a little bit of a rub here, and you'll see people mix them from time to time. And for the most part, it's not going to kill you, right? It's not going to, for the most part, break your automation. But what it can do is it can slow it down, actually by quite a bit. And you'll see this example here. I have a WebDriver wait. That's the explicit wait. And we have that set for 10 seconds. And then we have a polling time of a half second. Then we also set our implicit wait to 9 seconds. So what happens is when we actually do this wait, this explicit wait, we will look for the element. And in this case, it doesn't exist. So it will take 9 seconds to come back and say, didn't find it. Well, 9 is less than 10 seconds, so it'll try it again. Well, it'll wait a half second, then try it again. So you have 9 seconds plus 9 seconds plus that half a second. So now you're going to be waiting like 18.5 seconds when your timeout is 10. So you see how if you misalign these, you can actually slow yourself down quite a bit. So let's go on to some useful features. And actually, this is one of the most useful features in my opinion. I use this in every automation framework I build, and that is event firing. It is really hard to go back in time and figure out what happened with your test, right? If you don't know how you got to the point that you got to, right? Steps to reproduce. It's a thing. We need them. Basically, developers won't believe a word you say unless you can show them exactly how the thing happened. So what event firing does is it allows you to plug into the Selenium events, and you can plug that into your own logging mechanism. And we'll see this in just a little bit. It supports basically any of the languages. That being said, there are some drawbacks. You can log a ton of information. You can really slow down your automation if you're logging too much. So be a little careful. I suggest using logging levels because there's certain things that you probably don't want to capture, right? You probably don't want to get navigated, right? You don't necessarily need to have that level of information. But in cases where you do, it's really nice to have. So now that you have event firing, the next step is to be able to get the metadata around what does the system look like at the time, right? I now have the information on how did I get here. Now it's what does my system look like at that point in time. So Selenium gives you a couple of really nice things that give you this information. First, there's page source. Selenium will give you the page source for the page at any point in time. And this is basically just the DOM, and you can put this out to a log file or whatever. And this is really helpful, especially, well, 9 times out of 10, if I have a selector that just isn't working, if I grab page source and look at that, I'll find that there's something going on, right? My selector is wrong because maybe the structure isn't what I thought it was, or there's something else going on. But incredibly helpful. And then you pair that with pictures, right? Screenshots. What does the system look like at that point in time? Something cool to note: you can take screenshots of the entire screen, right? I get the whole thing, or I can actually take screenshots off the individual elements. So I can decide, you know what? I don't want to get the entire screen. I just want to get this portion of the screen. So really nice. A quick note about the screenshots of web elements. There is currently a bug in the C# bindings for Selenium that will prevent you from taking screenshots of web elements if you found that web element using an event-firing WebDriver. That should be fixed pretty soon, hopefully before this presentation goes out. But just know that there is a bug that's been fixed related to this, just hasn't been released yet. So on top of this, you can also get videos. And when I say you can get videos, these are via third-party extensions. So it's not built in. And services such as, say, Sauce Labs, they have this just fully baked in. And I'm actually a much bigger fan of having the services do it than I am having the videos myself. It just becomes a space issue. If I have to have all of this on my hardware, I'm not as fond of having the videos. But that's kind of pick your poison, what works best for your project. Now there are some really cool power tools, right? There are complex interactions, right? You want to be able to drag and drop, hover, that type of thing. And you can accomplish the vast majority of these with actions. So actions are are basically these multi-step things that you can do. And yeah, the big two are drag and drop, hover, and yeah, I'm not a huge fan of using them most of the time because they're just the complex interactions. If I can get around using them, I can usually speed up my automation. But they're there if you need them. But if you want ultimate power, you want to turn on God mode, that's where the JavaScript executor comes in. So Selenium allows you to execute pretty much any JavaScript you want. I actually use this on one of my side projects for accessibility testing. What the accessibility testing tool actually does under the hood is it injects JavaScript and runs it and checks the accessibility IDs and all that kind of stuff for the web app. And the executor is basically how it accomplishes that. This allows you to do basically anything, right? The web browser and JavaScript, yeah, you have pretty much full control. You can do kind of the common interactions. Like I mentioned with IE, sometimes it doesn't click when I expect it to click, so I have to fall back to JavaScript click. Well, this is exactly how I would do that. And sometimes I want to change the DOM. And usually in nice ways. And I actually have found this to be really, really helpful when doing things like uploading files, right? I can have the pop-up come up, and then I can use something other than Selenium to interact with it. It gets messy. So there are certain controls where I can just use JavaScript to inject here's a file path, and then it will do file uploads for me. There are a lot of edge cases where this is incredibly helpful. And if you look at my example here, this is an example where I actually want to put a red box around one of the elements, right? I might want to highlight something in the page. Really nice to do. And I can also kind of go to the next level where I start doing some playing around with like the cache and all that kind of stuff. So it's there, it's available. I would just say be very careful with it. If you futz too much with the page, I don't think you're going to get yeah, developers probably aren't going to fix the bugs where you inject some JavaScript, unless we're talking about security. But for the most part, yeah, you need to be a little careful here. So you might be saying, cool, that's all great. Anything else? And the answer is yes. Yes, there's so much more. First, switch to. When you are dealing with tabs and iframes, those can be tricky. And there are some of the automation frameworks that their solution for this is we just don't support that. And Selenium has actually done a lot of work to make sure that we actually can use these kind of things. Switching between tabs, super easy. Super easy. It does make your code a little bit harder to manage if you're jumping between tabs, but power to jump between tabs, there's going to be some work there. Kind of similar thing with iframe. They use basically the same structure for how you can go from iframe between iframes and between tabs. There is file detection. File detection is really, really useful when you're using like a remote grid, one of the browser services like Sauce Labs, where you want to say upload a file, upload or download a file, right? I want to use my operating system. Right? I'm running my test, but the browser is on Sauce Labs Metal. So this allows you to kind of redirect that traffic for where the files go. So this allows me to upload local files as though I'm on the Sauce Labs hardware. Like I said, really useful when you need it. I usually don't, but those times that I do, this is a lifesaver. And then there's something that's a complete topic all by itself. And I feel bad that I'm not going to do this any justice, but capabilities. So all of the decent browsers, I'm going to stick with decent. Chrome, Edge. When I say Edge, I'm specifically talking about the Chromium version. The pre-Chromium version has a lot of the same drawbacks that we had with IE, so that's just bad. So Chromium and Firefox, they allow you to do a lot of things. And just a very small list, they allow you to interact with the console, right? So if I want to get console logs, I can do that. If I want to emulate different devices, I can do that. If I want to play with my cookies, profiles, if I want to decide if I want to keep a cache, get rid of a cache, I can do all of that through capabilities. I can decide what my resolution is, if I want to use proxies, and so much more. And the other thing here is each browser actually has its own capabilities. And that's more or less true. With Edge and Chromium, Chrome and Edge basically have the same capabilities. I haven't seen any examples where they're different yet, but anything that has a WebDriver has its own set of capabilities. And each team kind of documents them their own way. But it's really good to know that in cases where you need to do something special, those capabilities are available. And this is something where if you're not sure if Selenium does it, the question usually isn't does Selenium do this thing? It's if the WebDriver does this weird thing. So good to go look at the documentation for the individual WebDrivers. And like I said, each of them are different. Sadly and awesomely, there's no consistency. I'd say this is still an area where like Chrome and Firefox kind of compete with each other and make each other better. And kind of last but not least, all the Appium stuff, right? Appium is built on top of Selenium, and being able to take those features and get them working on iOS, Android, Windows desktop is kind of amazing. So basically if there's something you can do with Selenium, there's a pretty decent shot that you can do it across the thick client applications. And with that, we are on to a demo. Just note, I put this demo up on GitHub, so if you want to dig through the code later yourself, have at it. Now we're into the code, and you'll see I have a couple of sample tests set up. which will illustrate some of the things that we had earlier. Something I want to note quickly, I have this set up for parallelization, so when I run this, we'll be able to run them all very quickly. Okay, first of all, I have a base test. This is where I did all my setup for Selenium. How do I usually get a WebDriver, logging, all that kind of good stuff. So let's look at our first example. We have find element throws. So what this will do is it will do a find element, and when it doesn't find it, it will throw a no such element exception. That's correct. And then we do the same thing, but do find elements instead. And we don't expect this to throw an exception, but as I mentioned, we expect the count to be 0, right? We find 0 elements. And then I have a demonstration of when we put those together. So we have a explicit 3-second wait and a implicit 4-second timeout. And the result of this will be, we'll actually end up doing 2 checks, because each check will take about 3 seconds, and then you have a ½ second on top of that. Like that to be about 6.5 seconds. And then I verify that in here. Then we have a search where we find a element, and then we use the XPath find to actually find the parent element. Here we do a action. This is basically a drag and drop offset action, and there are tons and tons of actions that you can use. This is just the simpler one, but you'll see how, yep, I want to drag an element by 50 pixels, and pretty simple to do. And then we have an example where we're kind of mixing a lot of the other concepts together. On this one, we're actually getting the configuration. The configuration for a Chrome using iPhone 8 emulation, and you see how easy it is to just add that additional. On top of that, we do a couple interesting things. We add event firing. Anytime these events run, we'll also write out to our test context and say which URL we're. Pretty cool. Yeah, it's good. And then we'll come in here and we'll start we'll go to a page. We'll open a new tab. Then command windows, and that's how we're opening the tab. Then we'll look at the individual elements, and we'll actually do some playing around with them. Add a red border around our login button, take a screenshot. Then we'll actually change the text of that button. Take another screenshot. Then we'll take the whole screenshot. And then we'll play in the other tab a little bit. And we can open a page with iframes. And we'll take pictures of the secondary tab with iframes. And yeah. And then we have another example where we actually go into more depth of what's going on in the specific iframe. So we actually interact with sub-elements within an iframe. So let's get these running. And you'll see that these all run in parallel, which is kind of awesome. Really speeds things up for us. And you'll see we have a bunch of browsers coming up, and they're all running at the same time. This is one timeout tests. Take a bit longer, and you'll see underneath we have this other form where it was entering things. Now we've run through all the tests, and like I said, this is up on GitHub, so if you want to follow along, you're welcome to. But I want to note a couple things. So we took a couple of screenshots in the tests, the long one where we do a bunch of stuff. And you'll see we've captured screenshots for elements and for the page. And you'll also note here that the context pieces that we had, those actually did get written to test context. And last but not least, we have a HTML file logger here. This is something my team built that actually takes advantage of the event firing. Good stuff. See here, we into what does the setup look like, so we know which version of Chrome. We know which version. We have event firing for when we looked for something, when we found it. Then you'll note that we actually do have pictures of the individual elements. And remember, we put the red around the element in the first one, the red, and then we renamed it, took another screenshot, and then we have the full screen screenshot. And this is extra tall because this was the iPhone emulation. And you'll also see that we get the screenshot of the secondary tab, so you see how you can bounce back and forth. And then you see that we actually have the full source for our sample page. And that concludes Selenium, the weird parts. Thank you for attending.